Okay, class, what we're going to talk about today is knowing your transformations. This is the list of 7 key transformations you have to master and utilize. I'm going to show you back and forth on a couple key problems how I look at information and make the decision to use a particular feature. Now, there are a few things I want to highlight here. When you start off with a function that is in terms of x, if you ever want to make a move right or left, there's something called x minus h and x plus h. When it looks like x minus h or x minusing a positive number, you're talking about moving to the right. And I know that seems weird, but in this situation, minusing an h actually moves a function to the right, and plusing an h actually moves a function to the left. So this is kind of counterintuitive to what you might realize. Whereas the other situations, if you have an f of x, this f of x plus k does in fact mean going up for the k units. So when it's on the outside, it actually is the actual value of the number is going up and the value of the number being minus, negative being going down. But when it's on the inside in parentheses, the minus actually means to the right this way, and the plus actually means to the left. So I know that's a little tricky one to understand, but what we're talking about is moving in this direction, and on this one, we're talking about moving this way. On this one, we're talking definitely about moving up, and on this one, we're talking about moving down. Now, the other ones we're going to master is where the negative sign goes next to the function. If you start off with y equals f of x, just some function in the world, and then they put a minus sign over the whole thing, it means all your positive y values have just become negative. So let's think about this. You started with positive y values and they all became negative. Well, when that happens, you are flipping over the x-axis. You are flipping over the x-axis. Now, if they put the minus sign on the inside, it means all the x's that were positive became negative. So let's think about it from your standpoint. I'm sorry. So for you, this is positive x, and it got flipped over to negative x. So if they're flipping like this, that means we're flipping over the y-axis. Okay, we're flipping over the up and down, which means we're flipping over the y. Now, the last one I'll talk about is squeeze, and I'll get to that if it becomes necessary. But all that squeeze really does is if you have a graph like a parabola, like a U, you can squeeze it in or you can squeeze it out. And we'll talk about the different numbers that happen. So if you have different shapes like a line, if you squeeze it in, it becomes more tilted. If you squeeze it out, it becomes more expanded. So that's just an example of how how the factor A will work. Okay, and it could expand or contract, but I'll get to that. So let's talk about 2 types of problems. One of the problems is transform y equals x squared, 1 unit left, 4 units up, squeeze by a factor of 3, then reflect over the x-axis. Well, you just have to remember what the first thing is. And it says 1 unit left. So you're looking for left, and you're looking for an x plus h. Okay, well, I'm looking for some kind of x plus h in parentheses. So that means I look at this x, and I say, okay, that means I rewrite the equation as y equals x plus 1 squared. That helps us go left 1. Okay, that's what the note said. Now it says 4 units up. Okay, now let's go back. Well, let's look for up. Oh, plus k to whatever function we're dealing with. Now there's a little trick here that you have to understand. When you go from one step to the next, you keep the stuff before because you are saying, I'm going to do 4 units after I go 1 unit left. So you write down what you already figured out on the first line, and then you remember the plus k. Well, plus k is plus 4. We're going up 4. So this is an up 4 move. All right? Now it says squeeze by a factor of 3. Things get a little tricky here, okay? On this situation, and I'm actually going to do a little bit of erasing here because I don't want this arrow here, so I'll move it a little bit. I told you to write everything down again. If the squeeze by a factor of 3 comes on the third step, now this is something very important to understand, under expands or contracts, and I should specify that when I mean by contracts, I also mean by squeeze. When there's this multiplier a, which is the factor you're multiplying by, it gets multiplied to the entirety of what you did before. So when I go to this screen here, this means when I multiply by 3, I'm multiplying by 3 to the whole thing I did before. And this is really important to understand the order. Because if this 3 had happened way before, the 3 would have been on the inside of this big parenthesis. Pardon me. But because it happens at this point, it's 3 times the entire thing. All right? And now the last part says reflect over the x-axis. So I go looking for reflect over x-axis, and I see that they want the minus sign in front of what we did before. So we rewrite what we did before, exactly what we did before. And then there is a minus sign that you have to put over the entire thing you've done before. And so, yes, we have transformed y equals x squared by 1 unit left. There's the 1 unit left. We have gone 4 units up. There's the 4 units up. We have squeezed by a factor of 3. We've multiplied the whole thing by a 3. And then we reflected over the x-axis, and that means we put a negative on the outside. All right? And then there's something called the answer, which is y equals negative 3 this. And then there's the simplified answer, which is this. And needs to be more simplified, which ends up being this. Now watch, this is negative 3 times this quantity times the 4. So I'm distributing across. This might be a little tricky to see, but I'm going here and I'm going there. And that gives me negative 3x plus 1 squared. But that negative 3 on the outside, because of that third step, that 3 would normally get multiplied to the 4. And because of the minus sign, it makes a negative 3 times the 4, which gives us a negative 12. And this is what I call the simplified answer for these instructions. Now, let me show you how it changes on this one. This time, we write what we're supposed to over again. It says reflect over the x-axis, reflecting over an x-axis. Let me go back, show you again. Reflecting over an x-axis is putting a minus sign in front of what we wrote before. So we put the minus here like this. Okay? Now it says 4 units up. Oh, well, write exactly what you wrote before. But going up, if you remember, going up k units is a plus k on the outside of what we wrote before. So we're going to write a plus 4. Squeeze by a factor of 3. We write everything we've done before. Multiply it by 3. And then 1 unit left. Now, the 1 unit left is tricky. If you remember, left is an x plus h inside the x part. That's the hardest thing to understand about left and right, is that it goes inside where the x is. So when I want to do that x plus 1 for moving left, I literally go right at where the x is. So what you do is you do write everything over again, but there is something right here where you have to go x plus 1 squared, right in that little part, plus 4, because anytime you do any left or right movements, it puts a parenthesis around the x and you put it inside, so it's inside even where the exponent is. Even right here, it's inside. So what we end up with, now this is an answer, and I know it's a funny answer, and it is correct, but the best answer is to simplify. And you will get y equals, I'm going to multiply the 3, and I get a negative 3 times an x plus 1 squared. And that 3 not only gets multiplied to the negative, making a negative 3 here, but that 3 gets multiplied all the way to the 4, and it becomes a plus 12. And I want you to understand in the end that these two answers almost look the same, but they're not. For all our hard work, I may have to do a little focus here. I want you to understand, because of the directions, this one was a plus 12 and this one was a minus 12. So following the directions, even when you simplify, can give a slightly different answer. I hope that kind of cleared it up. You may want to watch this video 3 times, maybe 4, but go in slow-mo, take your time. I think you'll be able to understand about the idea of rewriting, and doing just a little change for each direction. And when you've got that, you're going to become a master transformer. You'll be able to take simple things like y equals x squared and change them into y equals negative 3 times x plus 1 squared minus 12, just like that. Thanks for watching, guys. Keep up the good work.